The first-class cabin was silent until the sound of a slap shattered the calm. Every head turned, every phone rose, and in that single moment, arrogance thought it had won. A flight attendant's hand had just struck a black woman across the face, right there in front of everyone. No shouting, no chaos, just stunned silence and disbelief. But what no one knew, not the attendant, not the passengers, not even the captain, was that the woman she hit wasn't just another traveler. The truth waiting to unfold would shake the entire airline, because sometimes the quietest person on board holds the most power. Dr. Brianna Cole had spent years building a legacy above the clouds. As the CEO of one of the nation's most respected airlines, she was known for her precision, grace, and quiet authority. But beneath the power suits and boardroom meetings, Brianna never forgot where she came from. A neighborhood where dreams didn't often take flight, and respect had to be earned twice as hard. Every few months, she slipped away from her corner office and blended in among her passengers, flying under an alias no one recognized. No staff, no cameras, no private jet, just a regular seat on her own airline. It wasn't for luxury, it was for truth. She wanted to see how her company treated people when no one knew the boss was watching. That morning, Flight 2847 was her test. The soft hum of first class felt calm, almost serene. Polished glassware, murmured conversations, and the quiet assurance of wealth. Brianna settled into her seat, observing everything with quiet curiosity. To everyone else, she was just another passenger in designer heels. But calm skies can turn turbulent without warning. And as the cabin door closed and the plane taxied down the runway, Dr. Brianna Cole had no idea that this flight, meant to keep her connected to her passengers, would instead expose how far prejudice could still travel. Even at 30,000 feet, the plane climbed smoothly into the sky, sunlight spilling across the cabin like gold. Dr. Brianna Cole sat quietly by the window, her hands resting on her lap, taking in the quiet rhythm of the flight. She wasn't there to be noticed. She was there to observe, to see how people were treated when no titles or status stood between them. But not everyone on that flight saw what she saw. From the moment the flight attendant, Brenda Collins, spotted her, the air began to change. It started small, a delayed greeting, a faintly forced smile. A tray passed to the next passenger first. Brianna noticed but said nothing. She'd seen that look before, the kind that measures your worth before your words. As the flight continued, small slights became impossible to ignore. When Brianna reached for her bag in the overhead compartment, Brenda's voice cut through the calm. "Ma'am, that bin is reserved for crew items." Her tone was sharp, dismissive, the kind reserved for those she thought didn't belong. Brianna turned, calm and polite. "I'm only taking out a book," but the attendant's eyes narrowed as if politeness itself was defiance. "Please return to your seat. We have rules in first class." Nearby passengers turned slightly, pretending not to watch. A businessman smirked into his champagne. The tension began to hum beneath the quiet luxury, a low vibration of judgment that needed no words. Brianna's book remained unopened. She watched as Brenda glided past, smiling warmly at others, offering them the kind of courtesy she withheld from her. A small ache formed in Brianna's chest, not of anger but of recognition. She'd lived this scene before, boardrooms, hotels, conferences, where respect came only after explanation. Half an hour later, the cabin lights dimmed for service. Brenda returned with a tray but stopped at Brianna's seat. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right section?" she asked, voice dripping with false politeness. The question wasn't about the seat. It was about her skin. Passengers paused mid-conversation. Eyes darted between them. Brianna met Brenda's gaze, steady and composed. "Yes, this is my seat." Brenda's lips curled slightly. "You don't have a frequent flyer number on your ticket. That's unusual for first class." A man in the next seat chuckled under his breath. "Maybe it's a lucky upgrade," he muttered. Laughter rippled softly, and Brenda didn't correct him. Brianna's heart tightened, but she stayed still. Years of professionalism had taught her that silence could be stronger than fury. She took a slow breath, her mind sharp, observing every gesture, every word. But Brenda wasn't finished. She leaned closer as if asserting dominance. "If you can't provide the right documentation, I'll have to ask you to move." The businessman raised his phone slightly, recording. The air felt heavier, hotter. Brianna's voice was low, calm, and firm. "I've already shown my ticket." Brenda's tone hardened. "Then you need to show me respect." The words lingered like poison in the air. The cabin went still. No clinking glasses, no whispers, just silence thick with tension. And then it happened. A sudden movement, a sharp sound. The slap cracked through the cabin like thunder. For a second, no one breathed. Brianna's face turned with the force, her cheek stinging, her vision flashing white. The world slowed, the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Brenda's chest heaved, as if realizing what she had done only after it echoed. The passengers froze, disbelief mixing with guilt. The man who had mocked her lowered his phone, his smirk gone. Brianna turned her head slowly, meeting Brenda's eyes. Her face was calm, but her gaze could have cut through steel. And in that silence, power shifted, not with a scream, not with violence, but with composure. Because sometimes the loudest response response is none at all. The slap echoed long after it landed. The cabin, once filled with quiet luxury, now held the sound of stunned silence. Dr. Brianna Cole didn't move. Her cheek burned, her pulse steady but heavy, the taste of disbelief on her tongue. Around her, eyes widened, mouths parted, but no one spoke. Phones lifted, recording every second of a truth they'd rather pretend they didn't see. Brenda stepped back, her face pale, realizing the gravity of what she'd done. But arrogance is a strange thing. It doesn't fade easily. "You were being aggressive," she stammered, voice shaking yet defensive. Brianna turned her head slowly, her expression calm, deliberate, unbroken. The same composure that commanded boardrooms now filled the cabin. "No," she said softly. "I was being calm. You were being small." Gasps broke the silence. The businessman who once smirked lowered his phone, shame washing over his face. The power dynamic in the room had shifted, no longer fueled by fear but by truth. Brianna stood, not fast, not in anger, in power. Her voice carried not from volume but from weight. "Captain," she said into the intercom, "this is passenger Brianna Lewis in first class. We need to return to the gate immediately. There has been an assault on board." Static crackled. Then the captain's confused voice replied, "Copy that, ma'am." Returning to gate, murmurs rippled across the cabin. The once silent passengers whispered, realizing what had just happened would not disappear into the clouds. 10 minutes later, the plane rolled back to the terminal. The jet bridge connected. Uniformed security entered the cabin, scanning for the scene they'd been told about. Brenda rushed forward, words tumbling out in panic. "She provoked me. I was following procedure." Brianna stayed seated, her cheek red but her composure flawless. She reached into her carry-on and pulled out a sleek black leather folder. As she opened it, the room seemed to lean in. Inside was a gold identification badge, one that gleamed under the cabin lights. Dr. Brianna Cole, Chief Executive Officer, SkyNova Airlines. Gasps erupted. The air cracked like lightning. Brenda's knees buckled. The businessman buried his face in his hands. Even the captain stepped out from the cockpit, his expression frozen in disbelief. Brianna rose to her full height, the quiet authority in her eyes more powerful than any outburst could ever be. "Escort her off my aircraft," she said simply. The cabin held its breath, because in that moment, justice had wings. As Brenda Collins was escorted off the aircraft, the applause began softly, hesitant, almost uncertain, then grew into a wave that filled the first-class cabin. It wasn't just for Dr. Brianna Cole. It was for every person who had ever been silenced, judged, or diminished because of how they looked. Brianna didn't smile. She didn't need to. The sound around her wasn't victory. It was validation. She simply gathered her things, thanked the officers, and walked off her own aircraft in silence. But that silence carried more power than 1,000 headlines. Within hours, the footage flooded the internet. Millions watched, stunned, as the story spread across every platform. Flight attendant slaps black woman, then learns she's the CEO. It became more than a viral video. It became a mirror, reflecting how far society still had to go. The next morning, cameras surrounded the airline's headquarters. Dr. Brianna Cole stood at the podium, her cheeks still faintly marked. She didn't talk about anger. She talked about awareness, about what happens when judgment takes flight before truth ever leaves the ground. "Yesterday," she said, her voice steady, "a uniform was used as a weapon. Position meant to serve became one that shamed. But let this not end in outrage. Let it begin in education. From this day forward, SkyNova Airlines will retrain every employee on the power of respect. Because dignity," she paused, "should never depend on skin tone or seat number." The crowd erupted in applause, but her eyes stayed calm, reflective. For Brianna, this wasn't about revenge, it was about repair. Weeks later, she boarded another flight. This time, she wore the same uniform as her crew, not as a disguise, but as a promise, to lead from within. A young girl in row 5 stared at her in awe and whispered to her mother, "Mom, the pilot's a woman." Brianna smiled softly and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, "and one day you can be too." As the plane lifted into the sky, sunlight spilled across the clouds below, peaceful, endless, free. Somewhere on the ground, the former flight attendant watched the news, learning what true power looked like, not the kind that strikes, but the kind that stands tall after being struck, because real strength doesn't need to hit back, it just rises higher. So the question remains, how many more flights, faces, or moments will it take before respect becomes the default, not the exception?